So I was sitting in the coffee room the other day having a tuna sandwich, and I saw a poster hung up in there which gave me a good idea. Now all of these are BTCC winners from 1958 to 2022, and I was wondering who was the fastest, or more fairly, at what point did the time start leveling off. So I decided to do some research. Now I will stress to not take this as gospel. It was really hard to find some lap times of some years, and some were done in qualifying and some were done mid-race. Now I have chosen Brands Hatch because it just seems like the most suitable circuit to use because of the history of Brands Hatch, but also it is not going to be the most valid data, but it will give a really good idea. Now before we get going, let's ask some of the office staff what they think the fastest will be.
Yeah, go on.
Because these are going to go from, these are just telescopic dampers as such, and lever arms and stuff. These are going to actually probably go with gears and struts. To geometry is going to be independent front and rear.
It's a simple question. Yeah, quickest lap time, which one?
Probably this lot here, probably this sort of era, 1920, 21.
Okay.
Window, I think, is the quickest lap time.
Yeah. Right, okay.
The modern cars.
The most modern.
Most modern.
So I managed to find enough data of lap times online to tell a story, and the story is very, very interesting. Now there are some gaps in the graphs, as this was when they switched between the GP and the Indy circuit, but the outcome is the same for both tracks. So let's get into it. You can see the biggest leap is between 1960 and 1970, and they took off 20 seconds a lap in those 10 years. The gap between 1970 and 1980 starts to slow down with a lap difference of only 2 seconds. Now the gap between 1980 and 1990 jumps up massively again with an 11-second difference per lap, and this is where it starts leveling off. The lap fluctuation between 1990 and 2022 is only 2 seconds, with the fastest lap coming in 1996 with a 1 minute 29. Interestingly, the times actually increase through the mid-2000s and only start decreasing again in 2019. Now there is another big gap between 1997 and 2007 on this graph, and that's because I could only find the Indy lap times. So let's take a look at the Indy lap times. Now interestingly enough, it's the exact same story. The fastest lap times were in the late 1990s, during the mid-2000s actually increased, and only recently it started to come back down in the past few years. So when was the epitome of British touring car racing? Due to this data we've got here, it has to be the late 1990s.
Mansell again is going to try something here. Sure. Oh, Reed's lost it! Reed's lost it! Was there contact? I don't know. But Reed's off. Bang! Into the barrier on the outside. Mansell now in control, and the Ford guys can barely believe their eyes. Mansell leads the race. Now the battle is on for second place behind.
Now how and why can it be that over 25 years ago they were getting the fastest lap time? How is that possible? Well, there's one answer to that, and it's one word: marketing. Back in the 1990s, the coverage the BTCC had was unmatched. In a day without Netflix and YouTube, the 5 channels were king, and the BBC actually covered BTCC on their weekend grandstand show. This had huge marketing capabilities to the British public, and therefore attracted the biggest drivers, the biggest manufacturers, the biggest rivalries, and ultimately the biggest bank accounts.
The result, a crowd of 66,000 at Donington Park last Sunday.
It had Formula 1 champions like Nigel Mansell driving the cars, and Formula 1 teams like Williams engineering the cars. The big stage it had meant that teams were spending the same amount of money on the BTCC than they were in Formula 1. And the BTCC actually got its own AAA games on PlayStation. All of this combined with the loose rule set calls for immensely competitive racing and very quick lap times. Sadly, it started to become totally unsustainable, and manufacturers slowly started dropping out, ultimately reducing the level of competition, therefore leading to the increased lap times through the mid-2000s. It's good to see the progression of the BTC over the past few years. When you consider the lap times now are similar, if not slower, to the ones 25 years ago, it's hard to imagine how crazy it must have been in the 90s.